show you around 10 different projects during the next hour and a half. And I'm going to go quite quickly through it. So if there's any questions, you'll feel free to ask them when we finish the session. About a year and a half ago, we were approached by the Danish Architecture Center to do our first big exhibition, only on the stuff we do and not like just be part of a bigger group exhibition. So we really wanted to somehow use this to tell the story of the office in a different way. So we very quickly decided to do a book at the same time. And when we started on that, one thing that we really were eager to do was somehow to get away from this normal coffee table architectural book that has a lot of beautiful images and it has some wise text in the beginning, which nobody reads. All the architects just flip through the images and kind of only appreciate it from the visual point. And one of the things that we found interesting when we started acting as architects were the fact that it's a very different experience visiting an architectural studio than it is visiting a building. And we wanted to turn the book into more of a visit of an office than into a visit to a building. We once had a client that came, we showed him like a lot of different projects, and then there was a specific one which he found very interesting, so he asked us to send him information on the project. And the day after we sent the information, then he calls up and says, no, not that project, not this, piece of architecture, this really interesting story that you told me yesterday. And of course it was the same project, but he'd listened to the story behind it more than he'd actually looked at the project, so he actually couldn't recognize it. So we wanted to somehow tie these two things together, the storytelling with the actual visual components of architecture. And we started investigating how can that be done, So we did like a lot of work on it until we realized that we didn't have to invent it. It was already there. It was basically the comic book that combined visual and text information in a way where each is equally important, where you can sit and skim through it quickly, and if you get more interested, you can go into depth and actually read more about it at the pages where it's actually happening. So the whole Yes is More idea is to somehow show the story behind the scenes. Why does the architecture end up looking like it does? What are the meetings with the clients, the meeting with the municipalities, with all the economical constraints, with the political parties suddenly turning down what you think is the best piece of architecture you've ever done because of different obstacles. And showing like how does these different parts of society actually help you shape the architecture that gets built. When it then came to the title, we made it into this homage to some of our heroes. Of course, Mies van der Rohe, but also Venturi that told us that less is not always more. Sometimes you can actually get too little and too boring. You have to also do more than just this aesthetics. You also have to be something that people can actually understand. Then Philip Johnson, who's this New York architect that basically is almost like a library of the entire 20th century, going through all the different styles, all the way back from when he started in the modernistic area, and actually he's more like an architectural Madonna, that gets a new producer for each album and actually changes style, but keeps updated. And we think that was an interesting way of working, instead of always kind of searching for your own soul and just keep on doing that until you die. Then, of course, it was also a homage to Nicolas, who has this notion of that the more complexity you add into the assignment, the more you know about the thing that you're going to build, the more interesting it will get. So we summed all this up into like almost like a political speech. It was right at the same time when Barack Obama came out with this kind of idea that he didn't want to be a politician only for half of the United States. It was the United States, and he wanted to be the president for the entire country, both the red side and the blue side. And that's also what somehow we try to do when we do architecture, is not only to do architecture for the people that think like we do, but actually meet the people where they are and try to understand what kind of context you go into. Because what you normally expect from a newly started architectural office of young people is a revolution. That we say that all the things that the people have done in the previous generation is wrong. And what we believe in is more of this evolutionary theory, where both, of course, the way we think is this, that we stand on the shoulders of our forefathers and we learn from them the good things, but we also have to evolve into like the next step. And one of the things that Darwin describes in his book is this tree of evolution, which is almost like the design process of being in an architectural office, where you develop all kind of ideas, and then each week or each day, depending on how quick it has to go and how long you talk about, you have a meeting with the partners or like people from outside the office, specialists in different fields, and you discuss the different mutations that you have done since the last meeting. And then you kill some of them that doesn't fit, and maybe some of them get more life. And each generation is on a higher level, and they interbreed and sometimes create new subspecies, and some of them die out. So this is one of the meeting rooms in the office where you can see the sketch models of what we've done. So we actually try to keep everything as kind of this physical archive or like physical memory of what we have been producing in the office, so we can just at a meeting drag out a plate and say like, I remember we did this project 3 years ago, and we actually have all the investigations that went into it, and jump straight into to the knowledge and bring it into the discussion of the project that we're doing presently. So this is a project called Zahle, and this is just to show the way that we work, that within the first this is the sketch model from the first 2 weeks of working, where we produce this, in the beginning, very diverse and very models in all different directions, and we very much insist on that it has to be physical models. There's something about the computer that is really intriguing, but it also has a tendency to stay inside one person's head. It's three-dimensional when it is on the screen, but as soon as you need 5 or 6 people to look at it, you print it out and turn it two-dimensional, which is not what architecture is all about. Architecture is about the physical, three-dimensional objects that actually change when you look at it from different perspectives. So we insist very much, and then towards more the end of the design process, the idea that we want to pursue, develop, and it gets refined and gets tested for like the small nuances, and ends up with the project here called Zahle, that is sitting in the heart of Copenhagen. So that's just kind of an introduction to show you how we work and what some of the thoughts are behind the office. The next couple of projects that I'm going to show you is what we call the Copenhagen Trilogy. It's 3 different projects made for the same client, with the same builders and the same engineers. And it's the first project that we built as a company. The first one is called the VM Houses. It's a project that's situated in the outskirts of Copenhagen in a new urban development called Ørestad. In that area, the master plan was these like typical European perimeter blocks, and the problem was that on each side of it there was a canal. So we wanted to open up the courtyard instead of being introverted, to open it up to the canals on both sides. So we added on depth to the 2 buildings next to it, so they were 16 meters deep instead of only 12 meters deep. Then we bent it back to create a bigger park in front, but also to actually provide views from all the apartments. All the apartments are twisted, so they are actually 90 degrees to the facade, which means that instead of looking at a very ugly building that's lying over here, they look out at a park on this side and on the horizon to the other side. The other building, which is the M building, is then turned to the same logic, so that all the apartments in the entire complex has a view of the horizon. So instead of this would normally have been a view into the interior courtyard, it's actually the view from my apartment when I lived there, on the 7th floor, in the middle of the right there, where you normally would not see anything except the neighboring buildings. you suddenly get the sun going up in the morning. So there was a couple of other rules that we had to adjust to. There were some height regulations, which turned one of the buildings into a sloped roof and the other one into a stepped. And the reason why we wanted to do them, we did them differently, was of course because we wanted to somehow rebel against this perimeter block, turning it into more of like a more modernistic master plan where you have freestanding volumes. So we wanted each of the volumes to be its own character. So from then on, they have the same logic in the first diagram, but from then on they're treated as two individual architectural buildings. One of the side effects that I never realized before we actually built the house and I moved into it was that what this twisting did was actually that it did like almost like a trick to the view out of each apartment, which is the trick that a photographer will often do if he's asked to do a picture of something that is really boring. He will twist the camera angle so that all the lines suddenly disappear and gets a more perspective and more dynamic view. This is how it would have looked if the facade was just placed like it normally was. You would have looked out at the coming building that was going to be built on the other side. But because of the building twist, you could say the picture that is your window is suddenly turned into a much more dynamic view. So the MA house, to develop it further, because we had this 16-meter deep building, we needed a lot of lighting. So we decided that all the apartments needed at least a double height room somewhere in the apartment to drag in the light deep into the building. The M house is then kind of turned into this tribute to the Le Corbusier Unité Habitation section, where you only have a corridor on every third level. And then you could say our criticism against his brilliant project is that there's not really any spaces that has a panoramic view. So we both wanted all the apartments to have a double height space, but also to have a double width space, so they kind of borrow a room from each other. So that they all both get a view from the main living room, but also gets light deep into the space. We thought that was very simple. This was our first building that we were ever going to build, and it was for a private developer that said like he didn't care about architecture. We could do anything as long as we hold the price 50% or like 30% below the cost of a traditional housing block, which is quite a large impact on what you do. So we thought we did this kind of simple volumetric trick and this simple corridor in the middle. And then it turned out that when we actually put the two things together, we ended up with 37 different housing units. So you only have 100 apartments in each of the two, the V and the M, but they actually have a lot of them that are completely unique, and it means that when you actually live there, it's quite interesting visiting your neighbor because all the apartments are differently. So instead of having this kind of idea that an architect needs to do what the real estate agent tells him, which is to do an apartment that 80% of the population would like to live in, and then stack them on top of each other 5 to 8 times, and then multiply them 5 to 8 times along each other, and then that's a house, you know, which is how most housing is done. And we wanted to somehow say that, you know, the reason why most architects actually end up living in all the buildings that are 100 or 200 years old in the city center is because it's more diverse and it has more spatial qualities than these boxes that are just stacked on top of each other. So we wanted to somehow turn the project into that. So, except the first thing was that we treated the V and the M house differently in regards to the circulation, but also the facade material is different, the balconies are different, and the way that the roof is shaped is different. The V house is based on having arrival on every second floor and on the outside instead of in the central corridor. That also turned into this avalanche of difference. So we ended up with having 70 different housing units that we had to draw, which is something that first thing the contractor will say like that's going to drive on cost, and the second thing is that normally your boss in your office will tell you, that's going to take too many hours. We're never going to be able to make this work. So it's definitely something you do when you're a young architect and you have plenty of time and you really want to test things, because it ended up taking quite a lot of time. But we decided on that the way to cut cost, we would cut away all interior walls. So all the apartments are basically one big space. The only divisions that's happening is the prefabricated bathroom units that are standardized and are almost all the same in all the apartments. So it's very prefabricated, the entire house. And it's all based on a 3.6 meter module. So when the concrete guys and the bathroom is delivered, most of the house is actually done. And the rest is basically flooring and facade. So in that way, we could almost we cut away a lot of cost. But also this kind of diversity that then happens in these apartments is something that we wanted to celebrate when we came to the outside of the building. And one of the things that you're always told, at least in Denmark when you're doing housing, is that you need like a 10 square meter balcony on each apartment. The developer will tell you that it needs to be something like 2 to 2.5 meters deep and 4 meters long, so you can have a big table for your barbecue party. And we basically just took that balcony and then we cut off 1/4 and flipped it out to the tip, so that you actually have a big space which is close to the house and more, you would say, protected. But then you have this, what the client ended up calling the Leonardo DiCaprio tip, which actually ended up also costing the same as a standard balcony, because it only has one load-bearing structure instead of normally having two. So, and then the benefit is also, of course, that it casts shadow. The thing that is far away casts shadow less on the part of the building that's below. So we basically just did 3 different balcony types that are prefabricated and delivered on site, and they're just placed on the facade. But because there's 3 different ones of them, they create this very diverse facade that somehow resembles the interior diversity. So we actually project in the first place, and the diversity of it, we couldn't sell the apartments. Like normally, what you do in real estate, at least in Denmark, is that you need to pre-sell around 70% of all the apartments in order to start digging. There's 200 apartments, and after we've built a mock-up of an apartment and had it on display for 3 months, having 5,000 people coming seeing the apartment, he only sold 40. So the project was getting, shut down. And then we called him up and said, like, the problem is not the building. The building is good enough. It's the people. They don't understand it yet. Which is kind of a hard sell when you've never built anything before, Why would he ever trust you? But the prices were going up, so he was like, okay, maybe these young guys are right. There's a lot of interest. People are talking about it a lot. Let's go forward. And then it was put up for sale. And within the first day, after having built it, they sold 100 apartments. And 2 weeks later, it was sold out. 200 apartments were sold. So he calls us up and is like, completely happy. He actually tripled his profit because he built it for 15,000, around 2,000 euros, and had a profit of around 300 euros planned. But because he waited 2 years with selling them, he could actually increase the 300 to almost 1,000 euros per square meter of profit. So he was extremely happy. And then after putting down the phone, congratulating us, he called up the real estate guy and told him that he priced it too low, because otherwise he would never have sold so many apartments so quick. So he said, so he got yelled at. And then he went out the day after and bought the site next to it, which was then our next project, which is the mountain. The mountain is a completely different master plan story. Basically, this entire building is supposed to be a parking house for the entire neighborhood. So 500 cars need to park here, and 80 apartments are supposed to be here. It's right next to the metro that runs along here. So the new apartment building would be sandwiched in between a metro line on one side and a parking house on the other side. Not like the ideal situation for an apartment block, especially since this was the south-facing facade, so it would face directly out to like at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when you would be barbecuing. There would be cars coming in, making noise and dust, and so we were pretty sure that the master plan also in this case had a flaw. So we decided to say, look, okay, let's turn this into the first of our projects that we work with in a way we call architectural alchemy. The art of mixing together different functions that normally are kept separate in order to create a city. But if you mix them together, you can actually add value to both components, kind of turning lead into gold. So we lifted up all the 80 apartments to penthouse apartments and set them down on the roof of the cars. We then pushed down the corner in order to create 10 floors, and so that you would have enough floors for all the apartments, and then cut away a part of the building in order to have the right amount of square meters and to have the view from my apartment. That's basically the project. So the project is turned into this almost like Swiss mountainside in a country like Denmark, where the highest point above sea is 170 meters. And we have like this, in Copenhagen we have this like national song about like the hill outside Copenhagen, which is 25 meters high. That's like really, really like the mountain. So it's quite dramatic in the situation. And they actually lifted up above this foundation of cars. The house consists of 80 columns and 80 apartment buildings. So if you'd ever gone out to a contractor saying, stick a pole that's 5 floors high up, on top, place an entire house with 100 square meters of outdoor terrace and 100 square meters of indoor space, and along the column place 10 cars that are parked up along it, then the engineer would tell you you're mad. But that's actually the structure of this building. So it also tells something about that when you pool together more than something that is maybe undoable in a small scale, because you actually have the benefit of building more than a single unit, you can actually do stuff that is normally not possible. So it's kind of this mountainside growing up. And when we were then to design the facade of the parking house, which we suddenly realized was like 30 meters high and turning out to the metro, we realized we need to do something about this facade, turning it into something more beautiful than just a standard parking house facade. And we also needed to make it naturally ventilated in order to save costs on the ventilation, and also to save running costs on how to drive it. So we started looking into these perforated metal plates, and then one of the producers of it had just bought a new machine that could actually punctuate different sizes holes with a machine in a pattern that you would define. It's basically like a typewriter where you just write in the different holes that you want, and the machine kind of punctuates them one at a time, turning it into this kind of cloud. And even if because this is also a low-cost house, it's more expensive than the other one we saw, but it's actually built at the same price as a standard housing block in Denmark. So the facade is turning into this cloud, and you could say one of the things that, of course, the developer was skeptical on was that, of course, this process is much less industrialized, but it's actually, you could say, the holes are 20% more expensive to make than standard holes, but the plates cost is the most of the cost, so the actual perforated plates is only 5% more. But what's most expensive is hanging it up there, so the actual cost of the facade is only increased by 2%, and then when you look at the entire budget of the building, it almost disappears. So we managed to convince him that that would be done, And then we contacted a Himalaya photographer and asked him to take a picture of the Mount Everest foundation, since we've always been calling the project the mountain because of the housing. We turned the facade into this 3,000 square meter big artwork of a Chinese Himalaya photographer, which we then tried to get into the book, the Guinness Book of Records. It still haven't been accepted because they don't believe it's an art piece. They keep on insisting it's a building. But then this is the view from the metro, where you can see it, and then you come close and you walk inside. Then the roof above the parking house is both very generous, so that the space that is below the housing is actually, it's not only the housing that gets a better condition by being lifted up into the sun and the view, it's also the parking house that actually becomes this almost car cathedral with 15 meters ceiling height in some points. And then the housing, each floor has a different color, so that you can find your way home when you drive around in your car. And you can drive all the way up to the 5th floor, or take the diagonal elevator, which is something of it's a Swiss product. It has never been used in Denmark before because we have no natural need for it. But down here, it's invented for a natural reason. So you can either take that up or drive up, and then you come into these very colorful corridors. But the rest of the housing is very calm and Scandinavian looking. And you have these 100 square meter terraces for each of the housing units. You could say the front lawn is a public place where you meet your neighbor, and you can look down at the people living below. But we've made this very wide railing, which means that you can't go too close to your neighbor, so the back part of the terrace is still very private, which is also done in section, so that you can't look down at the people sunbathing on the terrace below you. So it's, at the same time, it's a very public terrace and a very private terrace. After finishing this building, which finished around the ending of the starting of the global crisis, and then had a hard time selling, we were also commissioned by the same people to do the next building. They still believed in that the crisis would run over, which has cost them quite a lot of money, but they're still surviving. So they commissioned us to do in the same part of town, at the end of Ørsted, down to a water and a big green area out here that can never be built upon. This giant block. It's around 60,000 square meter. The first things we did was that there was this kind of local plan saying that you had to build like a small tower on the corner, and it really didn't fit into the way that we wanted to work with it. So we started by cutting it off and making like a small tower and a big block. Then what you normally do with like a building of this scale is that you try to break down the scale somehow, at least in Copenhagen, because there's a big tendency in these new urban areas that there's no life in the streets. People don't really meet each other because you just stay up in your apartment or your beautiful balcony, and there's no life in the streets. And it's very monumental to build an apartment block that's 230 meters long. So what is normally done by contractors in Denmark is that you build the same apartments behind, and then you ask different architects to clad on facades to kind of cover up and create this idea of diversity, even though it's not real. So it's kind of this kind of fake diversity that we wanted to get away from. So instead of putting them next to each other, we thought, okay, let's put different program where they want to be. So we started by putting all the shops and the offices close to the ground where they want to be, in a quite deep building, 20 meters deep. Then on top of that, we added a level of row houses that are on 2 floors and are much thinner because they need more daylight, so they're only 12 meters deep. And in front of them is then created this south-facing lawn, which is around 8 meters deep. That is then, you could say, a private lawn for each of the people living in the row house. On top of that, we then added a layer of apartments and a layer of penthouses. And in that way created, you could say, a vertical diversity instead of creating this kind of horizontal diversity, which you would normally work with in a project like that. After having created this, there was a couple of things in the local plan. First of all, there was the need for a connection, an urban connection between two urban squares. So we tied the building together to form the kind of notch or figure 8. Then we cut a hole through, connecting the two sides. Then we lowered all the part that's offices and shops at the bottom, making it possible for the people living in the row house to actually be connected to the street. And then in the northern corner, we then lifted up and stopped in the square meters that we took away to the south, creating, you know, more of an office block to the north, which is not disturbed too much by the sunlight, and getting more apartments to the south. Also lifting up the apartment block that's on the northern corner to get a view over the other building. Then, as the final move, we pushed down the corner facing southwest, liberating the courtyard, getting a lot of sun in there, but also turning all the apartments that are sitting over here and giving them a south-facing view of the beautiful surroundings. And that was basically the manipulation of how we transformed the building into behaving differently than a normal block behaves. I mean, you could say that one of the things that we always try to do is to somehow tie together that, you know, that the reason why our building looks different is because they perform different. We don't want to just make the building look in a way just because it's a wish from the architect. We actually want to change the way that people use it or the way that the city functions. And that's like the heart, this is like a good example of that. So here, like, there's a small walk through the building. You walk up this what we call it's like a small copy of Copacabana, and it's actually shaped as it is because if you follow the 90 degrees to the direction of the stones, it's actually handicap accessible. So we call it the Handicabana. And so you can actually walk up all the way from ground level and all the way up to the 10th floor. And then in the heart of the building, where the figure 8 doesn't allow any light to come in, we actually just remove the building, turn it into this interior void, where all the public spaces are then added. It's a rule in Copenhagen on Danish building law that if you build a housing block, then 1% of the square meters need to be given to all the people living there as a community room where they can have parties and meet each other and have meetings. So all those things are put in the heart of the building at the center, in this void. And then at the end you walk out again during these things. So if you ever come to Copenhagen, make sure to come out to the cafe that's lying out here and get a cup of coffee. The next project is kind of the next urban development that we are doing in Copenhagen. It's been something that we actually worked for more than 5 years on and still have not started building. It's much closer to the heart of Copenhagen. This is the city center where nothing tall has been built. But in the outskirts of that, just like here, they built all the towers in the 70s. And we're kind of in the same range with this site. The site is situated in an urban situation which is quite strange. It has the new university here. It has like a more posh area of dwellings on this side. Here it has like a factory and research center where nobody ever comes. And out here it's like the cheap end of town where all the people that these people don't want to meet live. So the building is basically this kind of attempt to creating an urban connector, tying the city fabric together to perform as an own neighborhood that will actually, you know, take part in all the different functions that are in the neighborhood around it. mixing them together, and in that way trying to create a new and more cohesive urban area. The only problem was that that could never be done on that site, because this is the site, and this is the building line, and you're only allowed to build 12 meters high, which is never going to be like a neighborhood in itself. And the client that approached us wanted us to triple or quadruple the amount of square meters. So it was like a little bit of a hard task, and we ended up designing this, which is not really what the local plan was saying. And it was at a time where Erik van Eggerath had drawn this project in the center of Copenhagen. That had been cancelled because it was too tall. Then Foster drew up a new tower a little bit further away from the city center, but really close to the town hall. Then that was cancelled. It was taller than the town hall. Don't try to do that. Then we drawn up this Scala tower that I showed in the beginning, and that was cancelled. And Copenhagen was getting really tight. They haven't built any tall buildings for 30 or 40 years now. And so we started saying, okay, if we need to convince the politicians, then maybe let's start the argument in a whole different place. So we started by looking at the city's emblem, what the city is all about. And the city is basically all about being a city of towers, close to the water. It's a harbor city, and with a lot of diversity. And in the heart of our building, there was supposed to be a mosque. So we thought, okay, this building is what Copenhagen is all about. It's the city of spires, so we need to somehow create towers in a new way where we kind of celebrate this diversity and this city of towers by doing towers more like you did in the old days. The problem, of course, is that all these beautiful towers that everybody loves doesn't have any functions. It's done by the worst kings that tortured and took all the money from the people, or by the church, or by all these power people that actually didn't want to build something because it was functional for the people. They just wanted to build something because they wanted to look cool, and they wanted to be the guy with the tallest tower, and somehow that's what people now love, even though it's not done for them. Whereas what we architects tend to do, which is all these kind of boring blocks, which is for the people in order to make them have a better life, nobody likes and everybody hates. So we said, okay, how can we somehow mix these two things together to perform in a way where it actually does something for the people, but at the same time does not look like something they hate. So that's basically the way that we started to think of designing something out for this site. Then the second challenge of this project was the height challenge. So we said, okay, maybe the local plans say that we only can build 12 meters high, but if you look at the Danish building code, then there is actually a law saying that the distance that you have to your neighbor, you can build that high times 0.8 plus 3 meters. That's how much you can build not to disturb your neighbor visually and not to take his son. So that's actually an equation that we then base the building on. We measured all the distances to the neighbors, and then we multiplied it by the equation, and then we raised that up as the facade, turning it into this maximum volume. Then we analyzed the site in regards to urban connections and where we wanted to connect it, and then we turned it into this kind of zigzag path on the interior and another zigzag path on the exterior, carving away part of this mountain and turning it into this new building maximum. So that's basically the local plan. And we turned this in 5 years ago. It has all these urban connections on the interior, basically doing an interior space that ties together all the 4 neighborhoods that's around. And then during the summer, it has urban connection on the roof, tying together the area on the outside. The only problem, and then of course, because of this zigzag movement, then all the buildings have a free view because they are not placed in front of each other, but shifting from one side to the other. That basically is design of this building, and then we turned it into the to the municipality, and then we spent 5 years on designing the first floor and the urban roof of the ground floor level, like how bicycles could get across, how people would live, where there would be shops and where there would be. So we actually spent 5 years discussing with them how to do that. And now, here, like 2 months ago, it was finally passed through the city, and we've then now started up the project again. And currently we're having 10 people working on it, and we're probably going to start building this fall. I think in general you can turn up the volume. I mean, nowadays, of course, movies are done all the time. But just 5 years ago, when we did this movie, and we still do it quite often. And the reason why we do it is, of course, because it communicates a lot better. And a lot of our architecture is about communication, about how do you communicate with your client, how do you communicate with the city. So we put a lot of emphasis into actually explaining why things are as they are, but also to show people how the buildings look. So each of these caves under each of the mountain has a different program. One of them is a swimming pool, one of them is a library, one is a movie theater. And then this is then how you would see the building from the different neighborhoods. So the camera is basically shifting from neighborhood to neighborhood and kind of tying the city together by showing a movie of how this building will actually be visible from all the different neighborhoods around it and be something that people. This is then from within the mosque. This is the first mosque that we ever drew. And this is the lighting that would come through the facade during the 5 different prayer times of the day. So this is a little bit of how the project looks. You know, we spend an enormous time on the handicap ramp so that it's all accessible and exactly how the bicycles are going to cross it. You know, so I think it's actually been quite beneficial for how it's going to work. We thought it was something that we could actually do while working on drawing the building, but the city wanted us to draw that thing and kind of finish it before we went to the next level. Now, away from housing and kind of urban development and into, I'm going to start with like a really old school project. I don't know if probably some of you have known it. We did it like 9 years ago. It's been hunting us ever since. It's an aqua center or a swimming pool. Basically, the first question we asked ourselves is, how come that when you as an architect are asked to do a swimming pool, the first thing you do is you design a building and then you carve out a pool and then everybody swims around inside a building. What you really want to do is somehow design the swimming experience so that you swim around in nature or in the surroundings and actually experience that you're part of a city and part of the place where you are. So we basically turned it inside out, and we started by designing the water elements. And in the program, the brief, it specified they wanted a round pool, they wanted a jumping pool, they wanted a swimming back and forth pool, and then they wanted a children's pool. So we combined them all together to one continuous water element, tied together the ends, creating this giant circular pool with lagoons of of different, you could say, program for different kind of swimming. Elevated the rest of the building on columns, so that when you swam around, you actually were in direct connection with all the beautiful landscape around. And so we started by designing the water, then we lifted up the entire facade to kind of shelter the people swimming. Added like a little piece where you could swim outside, a little piece of nature going inside. But basically it's a 360-degree panorama from the center point where the lifeguard can stand and have a view of what everybody is doing. Then the Roman bath is like one arm stretching from the facade to the other side of the facade, holding up the facade. So the facade, all the facade is structurally held by the inner beams. This is the dressing room for the women and for the men, and this is the arrival arm that connects to the rest of the sports area. That's like a, I think it's like a soccer, big soccer hall that's over there. So you actually arrive here along this giant counter, buy your ticket, and have your cafe up here, and then you come in and you dive in, and you actually go for, you could say, the swim is the most important thing. This is the jumping pool, the Roman bath, one of my colleagues, my sister. And we were extremely happy. It was like an open competition with 100 different entries, which we won. And we started designing it. It was basically what formed the office. Before that, there was like 4 people at a kitchen table. Then, with this project, it grew to be around 10 people. That was back in the days where I then joined the company, and I was part of developing this further. So we worked on it for a year, and then it was cancelled. Politicians, there were new politicians coming in, and they'd heard about this water culture house, which it was called. I don't know why they called it not a swimming pool, but it was called like a water culture house. And they were like, why are we doing a culture house about water? You know, why don't we do like something for kids? It's a swimming pool, you know, it's for kids, you know. We're like, let's cancel it. And then, so it turned out that the neighboring municipality was interested, so we tried to talk to them and build it just on the other side, you know, so they could swim around, like wave into the neighbors. And it turned out that all the foundations that had money, because half the money was kind of coming from the municipality and half the money was private money. So the private guy that had kind of donated the money started traveling around, offering it to different municipalities, and we were getting tired of it, so we did a Counter-Strike version of it instead. So actually the interns in the office could like run around and at least experience good architecture when they had a little time extra. So we started up in Aalborg, then we went to Randers, then you know, the guy was traveling around, we were meeting all the mayors, which was kind of a good exercise, you know, talking to all the mayors of big cities in Denmark, until at last, you know, we hit it down in the center of Denmark, in Odense, and we're you know, back to like 100% health, and then that was cancelled. And the only thing that ended up coming out of this was another bath in the harbor of Copenhagen, which Copenhagen harbor is now so clean that you can actually swim in. So we designed this little tiny outdoor bath instead, which is based on the logic of that you only need one lifeguard, and all the pools are kind of centrally placed out from that, so you can see it from there. And it's actually a quite funny story, because it's kind of like this architectural acupuncture that has turned a neighborhood which was in the low end of town suddenly to something where everybody flocks to. So for 5 years in a row, all the housing in this area, the prices has gone up the most in the entire city, with like an investment of less than €500,000. So it's just sometimes some of the smallest projects you do actually have the greatest impact on the surrounding urban situation. Another project that also has to do with water is something we call the Maritime Youth House. It's basically a place for kids to learn how to sail, and a workshop for people to repair their boats. It was supposed to be put on a polluted ground, and the problem was it was like a very short competition, we were quite young, and the brief stated that 30% of the money in the budget was supposed to be used for this polluted soil. They would basically take off 30 centimeters of soil, drive it out, throw it in a landfill so there was a problem somewhere else, buy some other dirt and put it on the ground so it was clean and the children could run around on it. And we thought like, that is the most stupid way to use your money. So we basically said, okay, instead of just doing 400 square meters of indoor space and 400 square meters of terrace, like the program stated, and then spending the rest of the money on cleaning this, why not, for the same money, just cover up the polluted soil? The pollution was not so heavy that you couldn't, just keep it where it was. And then for free, you suddenly you're able to use the entire site to build on. And the way that you build a terrace like that is you basically knock down a number of poles and you link them with a grid. So by just knocking them down to a different depth, you could actually get this kind of landscape of possibilities. And that was our turn-in of a competition, integrating these functions into this landscape, creating a landscape of opportunities. And then we gave them like this library of what it could be used for. You could preserve an existing tree, you could create a little amphitheater, you could stuff onto the deck of boats, and you could like do a little swimming area. And we kind of just gave them this inventory that, if we win this competition, we just have these two ideas, and then we will curate the process, because it was a very difficult client. It was a very small assignment, but it had like an entire sailing club with like 500 people that was members of. Then it had this teaching unit that needed to teach, but they were owned by the municipality. And then the money was coming from another part of the municipality that wanted like an urban area. So every time we went to a meeting, somebody would be, pushing down on the carpet. Another one would be lifting up and stuffing in more boats, and somebody, So we were kind of this curators of how it should look, and this is how it ended up. As you can see, this wooden structure, basically like these waves that are inviting you inside into this canyon in the middle that is sheltered from the wind, where you can put together fold the sails in. You can walk up to the rooftop of the buildings and have a view of the horizon. Walk down again out to the end and have a view back at the building. So that was the Maritime Youth House. That was our first built project, and it's been very much used ever since, both by the kids and by the workshop and by everybody. And the next project I'm going to show you is also about water, you could say. It's the Maritime Museum. It's a project in the north of Zealand, right next to Kronborg, the home of Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, which of course never lived here. But it's also somehow been the biggest tourist attraction because of Hamlet, I think, in Denmark. Like 700,000 people travel each year to see this building. And on the first floor, there's a maritime museum. Nobody goes to see it, they only see the castle and they go home again. But a couple of years ago, UNESCO came by and decided to make it into a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which meant that the castle had to clean up the act. They were asked to throw out, for instance, the museum, and the museum suddenly finding themselves without a roof over their heads, tried to find like a site to build a new museum for themselves. So they found this old dock lying over here. The only problem was that it was within the new preservable area of the castle, so you were not allowed to build as much as a meter above the ground. And the competition was basically to stuff the old dock filled with program. So we decided to basically turn that inside out and place the entire museum around it. And the reason for that was, of course, because, first of all, doing an entire museum as a basement, of course, then you can see Kronborg, but you can't see the museum. And anybody that has ever spoken to a museum director knows that what he really wants is more audience, He wants Guggenheim placed in that boat. And you know, that would not allow, because then you wouldn't be able to see Cornwall. So by moving it out to the side, suddenly the dock became visible, and you would have your visibility back, and you would have this kind of sunken square in the middle of the city. So basically, the entire project is about preserving this old dock. Another reason why this was a good way to preserve it was that the old dock was falling apart. It was made out of concrete. It's been filled with water for 50 years. The last 20 years, nobody has been taking care of it. So the engineers told us that what we had to do if we want to use it was actually to build a dock within the dock. Which is really, you know, that's really lame. You know, you have an old historical dock with a beautiful texture, then you build a new basement. You know, why preserve it at all? Why not, you know, build a museum somewhere else if you can't see the dock? And you know, you also need insulation. So first you need to insulate, and then you need new concrete. So it was really stupid. So we said, okay, can't we do it another way? What about, you know, supporting it from the back, actually insulating it out there, and you know, putting in new earth anchors into the ground and holding it back in that way? And they said, okay, but that's going to cost you double as much. First you're going to dig around to be able to get to insulating. And we said, okay, but if we're digging around anyway, why not just hammer down a new wall out here, and thus creating a space in between the old and the new dock, and then taking away the water and the earth pressure. So that's basically what we did to kind of liberate the dock from program. Instead of drowning it in new functionalities, actually liberating the old historical dock and turning it into this, you could say, the biggest artifact that a museum could have. Because one of the things that's fascinating about maritime, the maritime world and maritime history is, of course, this scale. You know, if you've ever been out sailing and you know, it's suddenly something happens, it's a very dangerous and very powerful, you know, industry. And most museums about it is, you know, seeing like a little model ship and going into a cabin that's been built up artificially, and you don't really understand what it's all about. So we thought that the fact that you could actually preserve this historical 150 meter long old dock would actually make you understand the power of the maritime industry. So after deciding to do that, we looked at, okay, how do we go further? And two things were then added. First of all, there was, in the local plan, there was need for a bridge in the middle, which is the main access to Kronborg. Then out at the harbor, there was a need for the fire trucks to be able to go out on the bridge. So we were not allowed to remove the square, you could say, on top of we had to add this bridge down here. So the only bridge that we actually decided to add was then the zigzag bridge, which is the main entrance. The main entrance needs to be 70 meters long in order for a wheelchair to be able to go down and get underneath head height and into the main entrance. And that was too long, so we had to kind of ricochet it against the other side and bounce it off. And then underneath these three bridges that are on, you could say, the urban level, we then stuck in the different programs for the museum that needed daylight. So all the museum that's on the outside is artificially lit because they contain museum artifacts, whereas the things that you want to exhibit with daylight is then underneath the main entrance. In the middle, we've hung a conference center underneath the bridge to Kronborg. And you could say that was basically the project. The last opportunity that this gave us was actually in the program, where what they wanted us to design was basically only the exhibition spaces, a little bit of education, but none of all the researchers and all the administrations, because you could not have permanent working spaces below ground. In Denmark, you have to have a view of the outside in an office. You cannot have just skylight. It's not allowed to work permanently in a space with only skylight. But because we suddenly had an opportunity to get sidelight through the dock, we then were able to suggest to them to actually double the size of the museum and adding in all the stuff they wanted, getting in light to the museum. So instead of building admin next to it, actually stuffing it in. So one of the things that we of course worried were, is it going to be too dark, down in a basement in an old dock? So we compared it to one of the most famous row houses in Copenhagen, which has 16 meters across and 11 meters high, and our dock is 22 meters across and only 8 meters high. So the lighting situation in a ground floor, it resembles like living in a normal street. And as you can see here, we're situated in one end of the dock with a cafe beneath the staircase. It's very big windows and a lot of light is coming in. So you come in through the main entrance, and then the rest of the museum is also a ramp, whereas the entry ramp is 1 to 25, which is the minimum that it can be in order for a handicapped person to go down. Then the inside ramp is only 1 to 70. And 1 to 70 is, it's less than you have on a ship in order for the water to run off. It's less inclination that you have on a flat urban square in order for the water to run to the draining system. So it's something that the human eye is normally accustomed to perceiving as flat. We don't perceive things that are this close to being flat. It's almost like, the globe being round, but we all live on it and conceive it as flat. You have to get really far away in order to experience it. So underneath the first part of the ramp, we've stuffed in the administration, and when then the ceiling height gets too low, then it's just the museum. This is the cafe at the one end, and this is the conference bridge in the middle, with the conference on one side and the museum shortcutting across on the other side. So basically it's one big floor of the museum, and underneath you have all the admin and the research labs. In the end you have all the, like a storage wall with toilets and storage and elevators and staircases. And you can say that's one way to perceive it, one big museum. But there's a couple of things that you always consider when you design a museum. And one of them is flexibility, and the other one is how do you divide the space? And because you could say it's flexibility on two different levels. First of all, the museum can be perceived as this one giant space, but it can also be perceived as two long sides, 150 meters long, and a number of bridges spanning in between with like an intro in the beginning, and then these kind of shortcuts. But by just adding up a few walls, you can actually create 12 different exhibition halls where each of them have a different width, a different height, and a different lighting setting. So even though it's a very simple rectangular space, it's actually a quite changing space at the same time. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that because the dock was situated 90 degrees to the old harbor line, and our building is situated 90 degrees to a new harbor line, then there's this discrepancy which creates a fake perspective, which is kind of this, something that you found out in the Renaissance when you started drawing up the perspective. You actually found out that you could manipulate, and you started putting colonnades that were a little lower in the end in order to induce a feeling of that it was a longer walk to an emperor or a powerful person. And that's exactly the kind of space that we're creating here. So this space, which seems almost infinite long and like have giants standing at the ends, is the same length as this space. I mean, there's 150 meters down to that back wall, and there's 150 meters down to that back wall. But it changes when you walk around in it because of the fake perspective. And then the shortcuts in the middle creates this mezzanine. And then these shortcuts also creates the flexibility where you can actually shut off any part of the museum add new stuff to it and still keep ticketing. Because one of the things that's the most annoying for a museum director is if he has to shut down. And you know, if you ever come to a museum and you want to go in and it's closed because they're doing a new exhibition, you're never coming back. You know, it's like the most annoying thing. So by adding these bridges, you actually create like almost like an infinite variation of different ways of rebuilding. And the way that the materials are then developed is that you basically have like a wooden loop and a steel loop. So the exhibition is this kind of steel loop and with steel floors and steel walls. And then the admin and the conference room and some of the temporary exhibitions and the conference room here and the children's room there is all on wooden floors. So basically these two floors that kind of tie together the entire space, and they meet in then this conference bridge, which basically is one bridge, but it's three bridges that structurally behaves. So we have these three bridges at the top, but it actually turned into 8 bridges that are structurally independent, or almost structurally independent. So we have at the top a concrete bridge for the big trucks that are driving up there. And below we have then this what do you call it, conference center, and this ramp for the museum. And it's basically, you know, 2 bridges that interlock in the middle, and thus are able to minimize the structure of each of them. And that's the bridge here in the middle. So it's basically connecting the 2 different floors here and the 2 different floors there with a diagonal, creating this kind of seating opportunity. Then in the end, we also have like this big staircase, escape staircase that you can run up from, with the cafe underneath. And on the inside, we have another bridge spanning across, and on the top we have a bridge for the. So this is actually turned into also 3 different bridges that all span kind of across the dock. Okay, that's it then.